The following is a presentation given by Lisa Carlone Steindorf, founder and director at Core Success, international thought leader, motivational speaker, and award-winning author. The concepts and practical tools that Lisa shares help people around the world to transform their limiting beliefs and behaviors into lives that are inspiring, empowering, and meaningful.
I want to talk about why it is that, or how it is that certain people feel the way to connect with others is by overlaying their experience onto the other person's experience. So we have this concept of compassion. And compassion means actually with passion or with suffering. Passion comes from the Latin root and the meaning of the word is to suffer. In German, it's Mitleid, which means to suffer with. And so there's in my world, a misconception around the word compassion, meaning that if you're suffering and having difficulties, the best way for me to connect with you, the kindest way for me to be with you is if I suffer along with you. And what that translates into very often is then people not actually listening to the person who's having difficulties, but becoming involved with their own issues with the intention to actually connect and support and be kind, but getting lost in their own stuff. Because if you're having a difficult time and I start feeling pain, I'm not feeling your pain, I'm feeling my pain. Now I've detracted myself from actually being present to you. So, and what that often turns into also is then hijacking the conversation into my experience. If you're going through something, then I start talking about myself. Now I'm not talking about you, I'm telling you about myself, thinking I may be helping you, but now I'm getting lost in myself and you're getting lost in me, and now you haven't been supported and served at all. So that's what I'd like to talk about and see if you have any questions or, yeah.
Okay. What would you say are the most, helpful tools for somebody to manage this so that their compassion doesn't overtake their listening? So, because I guess what you're suggesting is that the listening piece is far more important than the I'm going to start feeling my own feelings and hijacking this conversation.
Yeah. Well, I'd say there are 4 steps. There would be intention, questioning, listening, and reflecting. So the first one would be to set an intention, like why is it that you're there? If you're, and this is especially hard if it's somebody we really love, like our children, our partners, or friends, if they're going through a difficult time and our heart's open and we just want to be there and support, I mean, that's a natural and human and beautiful response that we have, is to say, oh my gosh, I'm so here for you. To take a moment and to just go within and reflect on what is it that I want to do here. I want to serve this person. I want to love this person the best way possible. And so just to anchor that intention within yourself sets a framework that you're there for them. You're not being swept up in their storm. You're not being lost in their issues or in your own, but you're really setting an intention of being there in a very purposeful and mindful way. The second thing is then to ask questions. So not only as the person's sharing, but to start out with asking the question, how could I best help you? Like I could listen, I could offer advice, we could, make a phone call. Like what would be useful to you right now? And if you don't want to ask that question, if someone's in a lot of upset, just going to the third step, which is listening. But often people know what they want. I just want you to listen, or just tell me what to do, or whatever it is. So to give them the respect of asking them how you could serve, how they feel. And if they say, I don't know, then you also just go to the third step, which is to listen. And listening is, the intention there is to be engaged, what I call engaged listening. So you're not listening through your filter. So let's say you have, your partner has an issue with their boss. They have submitted a project and they've done their best, and the boss says, you know what, it's just absolute crap. And this is the worst work you've ever submitted and your job is on the line. And so you're listening to your partner saying this, and you've had similar experiences. You've gone through this, and you so understand what they're sharing with you. Is at that point in time you really engage with their experience. You become mindful of what they're sharing with you. You do not keep touching back to what you went through and so forth. You listen to it from their frame of reference. Carl Rogers, who's they call the father of humanistic psychology, just did phenomenal work. And what he established is when somebody is heard, truly heard from their own frame of reference, from their own emotional worldview, that when they're heard from that place, that alone is healing. Just being heard, even if nothing has changed, their circumstances remain the same, they haven't taken any action. To have another human being walk with them inside their world, just for a little bit, is a healing experience. So when you're listening to your partner this way, you're really letting go of your agenda, your filter, I remember my boss. You become very present in this moment to what your partner's sharing, and you listen, well, what did their boss say? And, what happened? And then you can ask these questions like, and what did he mean by that? Or has that happened before? Or how did that make you feel? Like really being involved, a curious participant in their story. And when you've gone through that and you get it and you've been with it with them, and then you can reflect it back so they know that they've been heard. So, wow, I really hear your frustration. And I get that. That's tough. Like I remember you telling me, like, you've been pouring your heart into this for weeks. And to hear at the end of the whole thing, he thinks or she thinks this is your worst work ever. Like, that's a tough thing to hear. And I can imagine you probably just want to give up independently of feeling scared that your job's now on the line after such intense effort. Like, that just must be hard. So really, at that point, getting that person's experience and reflecting it back to them is a way of really being there for the person. Now, that's the ideal scenario. And when you practice that kind of engaged listening, it's a wonderful experience. It opens up the world for these people because it relativizes things. They no longer have to fight for their experience. They don't have to justify how hard they work. They don't have to prove how unfair the circumstances are. They don't have to speak louder so you'll finally hear them and get out of your own head and your own experience. They can just share and be heard.
Yeah.
And in that experience, everybody has their own answers. We really do. We know ourselves the best. We know the direction. We need sounding boards. We need maybe input, but we have our own answers. And that is the most optimal way for a person to come to their own answer. Say, God, actually now thinking about it, maybe if I had just asked for more help, or maybe if I had listened to what the instructions were, or actually, this has happened. This is the third time it's happened at this job. This is not my job. This boss is never going to get the quality of my work. So whatever results out of that exchange with you, that your partner's hearing, wow, so this is what's going on for me. And they have that opportunity because they're not having to fight for their own experience. They can just be with their own experience in your presence and with your support.
I love it. Yep.
And
Good.
What often happens, or and where this came from for me was, simple example. I recently got contact lenses, and I've been wearing eyeglasses for 30 years, and this was just like a huge thing for me. So exciting! Oh my God, I can wear contact lenses. So I'm sharing with a friend about my contact lenses, and I spent a good amount of time with the doctor practicing putting them in. I have very small eyes, so just getting my eye open enough in order to slip this huge thing into my eye was a challenge, right? But I figured it out, and she explained it to me. So my friend says to me, oh, well, you're just a newbie. I've been wearing contact lenses for years. I can tell you how it's done. And I said, oh, really? I said, how do you do it? She said, no, it's not how I do it. It's how it's done. And I said, so what you're saying to me is that there is a way to do it? And she said, yeah. She said, and you're going to find that out with time, but I can save you all that time and just tell you at the beginning. And I said, well, I believe that the doctor's been doing this for a while. She gave me these tips. She said, no, but I need to sit down with you and I'll show you how it's done. And in that conversation, I realized I felt really frustrated because, like, it's my eyeball, it's my eyelids, they're my two fingers. It was my experience. And I said to her, so if I understand you correctly, you have the opinion that there is a way to put in contact lenses, and you have found it. And because you have found it, you now are going to tell me how it is because you want to help me. And she said, yeah. Now I have to totally get, her intention is to be supportive. Like, she loves me. She wants to make it easier for me. She doesn't want me to struggle with contact lenses. But the premise of her support is that she has the one singular, the one singular only right way to put in contact lenses on the planet, and I need to sit with her to get it. Now,
wow, that's worth $1 billion.
Now, as supportive and as loving as that is, the difficulty with that is she has completely annihilated my experience and me in that situation. I don't exist. Yeah. My thought process doesn't exist. My own eyeball doesn't exist. It's really about how she knows how to do it. Now, I'm not trying to make fun of her because she's a loving, really wonderful woman. But in further conversation, what we realized, both of us, is that she does this in many areas of her life. And what I realized is that most people do this. And her reason, and when we drilled down to it, was very interesting, that she said we have a common experience as human beings. And what connects us with each other is a common experience. We all have eyeballs. Yeah. And millions of people have contact lenses. And most of those millions have struggled putting in contact lenses or taking them out. So we have a common experience. And what connects us, says she, is that common experience. And she's right. She's absolutely right. But here's where the switching of the tracks takes place, where you get into a detour. The common experience is one of the things that connects us, but I cannot have your experience. That's not possible because I'm not in your skin. I can't even stand in the same place you're standing in because you're there. I'd have to move you aside. And if I moved you aside, now you're standing somewhere else.
My place. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So what the desire is to connect. So her desire to connect with me was through a common experience, and she was trying to have our common experience be the same experience. So what...
Yeah, I like that distinction. Common versus same.
Yes, exactly. So the difference, the distinction between common versus same experience. So what I shared with her, that desire to connect takes place not in sharing the same experience, but in understanding our common experience. And furthermore, in really being curious about and participating in a person's individual common experience. Right?
Yeah.
And
and it's less conflictual.
Right. It's less conflictual because there's nothing to compare. You may want to compare and share like it was this way for me and it was that way for you, but there's no competition. It's not, no. You don't understand. This is how you're supposed to put in the you have to do this first and that first.
Right.
You're right, or I'm right, and you're wrong. And so when you are trying to understand it, and interestingly enough, people have this on the most amazing things. How do you ride a bicycle? How do you have sex? How do you cook spaghetti sauce? Like, there's millions of ways to cook spaghetti sauce, right? So it's to go into curiosity when you're asking those questions of somebody, like really being curious, like, how do you cook your spaghetti sauce? Like, what is it? What are your ingredients and what do you do first? Really? My grandmother used to always put in a teaspoon of sugar. She was of the opinion that sugar balanced out the acidity and the saltiness of the tomatoes. And that's what made for an excellent tomato sauce. She was Italian. I trust her, right? I never heard of anybody else putting a teaspoon of sugar in their spaghetti sauce. There's no right way, but to be fascinated about that and why is it that way, and then try it out if you want to try the spaghetti sauce.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, I mean, I love this, and I would say, in my experience, not many people know how to listen that way. And I love your distinction between the common versus the same experience.
Yeah. I think
listening in that way is a very, very different way.
What's important in relationship, especially when somebody's challenged with something, but even if they're not, even if you're just listening, but it comes up especially if somebody's challenged and you're wanting to help and serve, you have to have the belief that this person knows the best for themselves. If you think you know, you are going to spend your time trying to push that onto them because you care. But to come from the premise of everybody has their own answers, if they're given the opportunity to go within, to have support, to listen to what's going on inside of them, to get feedback on what's going on outside of them, and then to give them the space to make those decisions or to come to those conclusions for themselves, because whatever they conclude or decide is perfect for them. Whatever you conclude or decide is not going to be perfect for them because you're not them.
And so now you've talked about how people can listen. Now, when you're sharing and somebody's not listening to you, what would you say the tools or the techniques that they can use in order to sort of deal with somebody who's not listening? Mm-hmm. So somebody's being compassionate and they're taking on the story, but the suffering becomes their suffering. Mm-hmm. So what would you recommend that somebody do in that instance?
So well, first of all, awareness is always the beginning of everything. And what happens, unfortunately, is that people become aware when they start to get frustrated. So they just know that they're frustrated. It's like, okay, I'm frustrated, and that's where difficulties come in and conversations start to escalate, and then people say that they have conflict. So to be aware when you're sharing, what do you want? To know what you want at all times in any situation is really useful. Like if you're going to walk into the kitchen, what do you want? Well, I want to get a glass of juice out of the refrigerator. Or, you're going into the shower, what do you want? I want to get my hair clean, or I want to shave my legs. Whatever it is that you have, you know what you want, like you know why you're there. So if you're sharing with your partner and whatever's going on, know what you want. I want you to listen. Even if you're not saying this initially, I want them to listen. I want them to give me advice. I just need to vent. I want them to tell me it's not that big a deal, whatever it is. And what we, especially in love relationships, what we often do is we expect the person we're talking to know precisely what it is that we want them to do. And if they don't, we're pissed. But we don't tell them why we're pissed. We don't tell them why we're frustrated with the way that they're listening. We just get frustrated. So in this situation, when you're sharing and you're going on and you notice that your partner is starting to give you advice or saying, oh, it's not a big deal, and you notice that frustration coming up, or ideally before any frustration comes up, say, you know what? It would be really helpful to me if you would just listen to me, and then when I'm done, that you tell me your opinion. That's all I'm asking for. I don't need you to fix this. You can tell them what you don't want. I don't need you to fix it. I don't need you to tell me what to do. I just want you to listen and then tell me what you're hearing. And maybe tell me what you would do. But just for now, just please listen to me and let me get this story out because it was a really tough day.
Yeah. And what I really love about that is the simplicity. Well, I mean, simplicity, except for, it's having the awareness first to get clear on what it is you want, because a lot of people don't have that. And then second of all, recognizing when you're not getting what you want and being able to, I guess, express those boundaries, or I guess the violation of those boundaries should they be violated.
That's exactly right. And to give yourself permission, I mean, the whole thing comes down to self-studentship, which is something that I talk a lot about, is knowing yourself. Who are you? What do you want? And how do you best get what you want? And interestingly enough, that is not a selfish thing. It's the most, well, I'll say, I take that back. It is selfish, but being selfish is the most loving thing you can do. Because when I'm taking care of my needs, I'm going to be clear, I'm going to be satisfied, I'm going to be the happiest I can be, and I'm certainly not going to go around blaming you for everything. Because I've taken ownership of what I want, and I'm asking for it as best as I can. It doesn't mean I have to get it in order to be happy, but at least I'm asking for it, and that's halfway there.
Yeah, and I would suggest that it's not being selfish, but more self-full, right? So it's like,
Yes, that's a nice way of putting it. It's
allowing your,
exactly.
you know, filling the glass, right?
Yeah.
for lack of a better term.
Well, but to
Yeah.
give oneself permission to say I'm important, that is so not the way that we're raised, especially in the Western culture. Well, not only in the Western culture, in most cultures,
Yeah.
And the funny thing about that is we're all self-centered. I mean, we wake up in ourselves. How else are we not going to be, we look at the world through the back of our eyeballs. We taste
Yeah.
things through our own tongue. We touch things through our own skin. Our entire experience is self-centered. Now,
Yeah.
what is important, however, is to realize that there's 7 billion other selves out there. So we're not doing this experience on our own, and each one of those experiences is equally valid. So that's where we come
Yeah.
back to the common experience, understanding that we all have a common experience, but we're not having the same experience. So I can sit over here and talk about my experience of the day or how it is when I go exercising, and then I can say to you, how is it for you? And I don't know how it is for you. But to listen, it's like the word. I have a friend of mine who says often, you use the word fascinating a lot. I said because I find it fascinating. Like when somebody explains to me something I've been doing, like running on a treadmill, easiest thing in the world, right? I run on a treadmill. There's not 15 million ways to run on a treadmill. Yes, there are 15 million ways to run on a treadmill. And I listen to people, where they put their hands, what they're paying attention to, how they feel the ground underneath them. Do they run on their toes? Do they run on their heels? All these different, where they put their hands, what are they paying attention to? Some people like to next to the window. Other people want a mirror in front of them. Other people want to watch television. I mean, there's all these different things. I'm like, whoa, seriously? And the reasons for all of that, also fascinating. So for me to sit here and say, no. Let me explain to you what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to want to be at the window and not look out, not look at a mirror and put your hands in this position and go heel to toe. Who the heck am I to tell anybody else how they're supposed to run on a treadmill? And that's,
Yeah, the right way.
right. How do you do it the right way? But we do that all the time. You get on on the road and you see somebody making a turn. It's like, what are you doing? That's so ridiculous. Now, of course, we've all learned there are certain optimal ways. There are best practices. Absolutely. There are best practices, and there are tried and true methods to do things really well. I'm not arguing with that. You look at our top athletes, top musicians, anybody who's an expert in their field will tell you these are best practices. And yet, each person has their own flavor and their own style of doing even the best practices. That's just what it is.
And I would say that the best practices even evolve as the person evolves.
Absolutely.
So what you consider to be a best practice, we'll say, I don't know, year one of being a professional athlete, you may or may not consider to be a best practice year 15 of being a professional athlete.
Absolutely.
In the same field.
Yeah, the best practices will absolutely evolve as you get better. And you may have two people that start out as swimmers. I mean, look at Michael Phelps and how he swims and his style and how he goes about doing things. And there are other, top-notch swimmers in the world who have become also exceptional, and they do it slightly different. They have different methodologies and so forth. Who's to say which one's better? We can give gold medals because of time. That's a measurement. But as far as aesthetics, as far as what's kindest to the body, as far as what's most pleasurable, we don't know that. We just know that Michael Phelps is the fastest.
I love that. And what you've just brought up is the measures. So like depending on how people are measuring different things can also determine the level of success. Because if the Olympics was all based on aesthetics, it's not certain that all the gold medals would have been attributed to the people who had the best time.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And so the measurements that we have are measurements based on facts, which are, things that we can measure with our senses. So when we say that somebody's the best at something, we have certain measurements that we put in place, and we've all agreed upon, fastest, tallest, highest, strongest, hottest, coldest, whatever, shortest. Yeah. So we've used our senses to put measurements into place and say, okay, the fact is, according to this measurement, this person has accomplished it the best or the most or what have you. but the personal experience of that, the personal flavor or pleasure or pain in a particular situation is individual. That cannot be measured. You can't do that. I refer back to the genius of non-judgment, that separating the facts from the personal experience. The facts can be correct or incorrect, but the personal experience is always valid, and it's always different for each individual. So you can have the same measurements, but the personal experience is going to be different, and the best way that you can connect with another person is to understand what was their experience of that. What did that feel like? Why did they do it that way?
And what are your thoughts about, because the thing that's come up for me is I'll call it the disease of comparison, right? Mm-hmm. And so when people, oftentimes they don't feel good about themselves or their performance or whatever, it's because they're comparing themselves to others. So what would you say would be the technique? And I kind of see this in this this connection, right? Because people are going to try to connect with others, and they're going to compare themselves to, their experiences or their performance or whatever to the other person. Mm-hmm. So what technique might you suggest or, use for people to, I guess, well, first of all, do you think that's an issue? Do you think the comparison is an issue? And second of all, how would you sort of deal with that?
Yes. So, yes, definitely. Comparison, there's a saying I use, you can either compare yourself to other people, or you can be happy, but you can't do both, right?
Yeah.
So the problem with comparison, now there will be certain skeptics who will say, well, comparison is important because that's how we grow. We look at others, we try and set goals and improve ourselves. I'm going to argue that point, but let me get to that in a moment.
Yep.
What comparison does is it basically puts yourself and your experience and your abilities in measurement with other people. Now, if we go from the premise that everybody does things differently, that in alone is an erroneous thing to do, because I cannot do it like you do it. I can learn, if you are what's something you do well?
Completely random. I'm really good at doing the silicone joints in bathrooms.
Awesome. Okay. So you are a master. You are a master at doing silicone grouting and joints, right, on tiles. Okay. So I can sit there and I can watch you do it, and I can see how clean the line is, how straight it is. There's no wavering. Wow, it's just beautiful, smooth, just looks fantastic, pleasing to the eye. I can look at that, and then I can do my line. I can say, whoa, boy, that thing is wobbly, and I got holes, and it's hard to hold the thing. So I could say there's a comparison there. The thing that's going to happen, though, if I'm going to improve myself, which is what my goal is, if I want to improve, I can look at what you're doing. I can ask you questions. Again, I come back to being really curious about your experience. But at some point, I need to go what I call internal orientation and look at how am I doing it? What do I need to change? Do I need to hold this differently? Do I need to press more quickly, more smoothly, harder? How do I move my elbow? What do I need to do in order to make this work? So I can look at you, I can reference you, I can hear you, I can learn from you. But in the end, the only way that I can improve is by using internal orientation and improving my personal performance in doing that silicone grouting. I cannot do it purely through watching you. That's not possible. I have to come back and come back to myself. So the comparison, what most people call comparison, I'm gonna call referencing, because I can reference you. What happens with the comparison, why that's a problem, is because the judgment comes in. Oh, she does it better, I'm not good. So now I've set up a premise for myself that I'm already the underdog. And when I'm coming as the underdog, I don't have anything to move toward. I'm trying to get away from being the underdog. If I'm evolved enough to say, okay, I want to be top notch, let's say I'm not trying to move away from being the underdog. Let's say I'm trying to be top notch. That's awesome. But again, if somebody's better than me, then I'm still worse than them. If I take away that better and worse, which exists in comparison, and I go to referencing and I say, okay, her line is smooth and mine is bumpy. How do I get my line smooth? Now I'm talking about my line, not yours. I've referenced yours.
Yeah.
But now I'm looking at my line, and and the only way I can get my line smooth is by practicing, trying this, trying that, turning my hand. And then if I can tell somebody else how to get a smooth line, but then they're going to have to do it for themselves. So
Action.
It's action.
Like experiencing it.
It's experiencing it, but from a place of personal reference, not from a place of comparison. I can reference you, but I'm not going to compare myself to you, because comparison inherently has the judgment of better or worse.
Yes. Reference has no judgment. And so what about people who don't have the intention of learning?
I don't understand your question.
So, okay, so the question is, you go into any situation, whether it's, the comparison of one, I guess, result is better than the other, or, just actually listening to somebody in a conversation. What if, and maybe this doesn't even matter because it's not going to change, but what if a person has no awareness or intention of learning, growing in their life? Can you do something about that as an individual, in society with those people? Mm-hmm.
So I would say this: the natural state of being is to grow. You look at any living organism on the planet, they're going to grow and change. That is life. A plant, an amoeba, anything is going to grow. If it doesn't grow, it's going to die. There are those two directions. So if you have a person who appears to not want to learn and not want to grow, what they're actually doing is they're hindering that natural process. And so if they're hindering that natural process, they have a reason for it, whatever their reasons can be. So if you want to be supportive of them, you can frame it that way and say, so I see you not moving forward, or I see you saying you're fine with where you're at. Why is that? So go to curiosity, because if they're not growing, there's possibly a fear of failure. There's a belief there's nothing, they can't get anywhere else, like this is their lot in life, is to just stay at this place. They believe they don't have the creativity. They believe they don't have the means. There's so many different reasons why somebody might become what we call stagnant. But even if somebody is what we can measure from the outside as stagnant, they're still growing. They're still moving. They're still breathing and living. Their bodies are aging. They're digesting. They're still in the process of living. And as long as somebody's in the process of living physically, the natural propensity is to grow. So if they're not doing that, they're hindering it. And if they're hindering it, there's a reason why.
And it's all sort of in a lack or scarcity mindset, sounds like.
Yes, or fear-based. In what I believe is that everything has two sources. It's either fear or love. It's either I'm afraid I can't get anything done, or I love life and I want to throw myself into it. Or I'm a little nervous, but you know what? I really love myself and I want to do better, or I want to feel good. Even just wanting to feel good is a love experience rather than a fearful experience. So, but to answer the original question, what can you do? You can't do anything other than be interested. You can never move somebody. Actually, you can never teach somebody anything. The only thing you can ever do is create circumstances under which a person can learn. It's all you can do. And if somebody does not have the willingness to understand or learn, you're not going to get there. And when I do mediation, the premise is everybody in the room wants to be there and wants a solution. If somebody does not want a solution, it will not work. Period. Because they're not interested.
And you ask them to leave?
No, I don't ask them to leave. But if I've been invited there and there are two parties or more and one person says, I am not interested in finding a solution, it's not going to go anywhere. Now, the point that they're in the room is an indicator that they may definitely want a solution, but they don't think one's possible. So then I need to work with that a minute. Hold on a second. So if somebody says they are not interested in finding a solution, but they're still in the room and they have their arms crossed and they're arguing, chances are they do want a solution. They're not going to admit it, but they have no idea how to get out of the situation that they're in right now. And that's where my work comes in. But if somebody is adamant that they're not interested, you can move heaven and earth. Nothing's going to change until they want to make it happen.
Yeah. It's about it comes back to what you said at the beginning, which is the intentions.
It is the intention. That's exactly right. And that's free will. I mean, that's our choice, right? And I find that we, at very, 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 very young age, we are weaned away from wanting what we want. We are told, you don't want that, or you're not allowed to want anything. Just to say I want is, don't say I want, say I would like. And so the whole idea of wanting something, and we all want things. We want to be loved, we want to have fun, we want to do well, we want to be seen, we want to be heard, we want to experience life, we want to be protected. All of those things are things that we want, and they're natural. And if we give them credence and we let those be our motivators, I think the fear is, and a lot of religions say that, well, if you just want everything, you're going to, we're going to have a bunch of heathens going around, having sex all the time and stealing and eating chocolate and never getting anything done.
Sex and chocolate, that's all we get.
Right. And so, but that's predicated on the idea that the human race does not want to do well. The idea is that we're not all here to really be kind to each other and to help each other. And there's
make a contribution.
Yes, to make a contribution. And there's research. Dr. Keltner at the University of Berkeley at the Greater Good Science Center. He's amazing. He's been researching Darwin's work. So Darwin actually, what we know of Darwin was only halfway through Darwin's work. What we've heard about Darwin's work is that the theory of evolution is that survival of the fittest. Well, first of all, he never said that. It was somebody who studied Darwin that coined that term. What Darwin found out, and what his work concluded in, was that it's not the survival of the fittest and the toughest and the hardest that survive. It's the individuals within a group, and it's the groups themselves that work together, that are understanding and seek to support each other. Those are the ones that survive. That's what pushes the envelope of evolution. And Dr. Keltner at the Greater Good Science Center at Berkeley, he is studying physiologically first of all, are we hardwired to be kind, which he has proven we are, and secondly, how does that work? If we are hardwired to be kind and to do good, how does that actually express itself neurologically, physiologically? And he's doing research to prove this. It's absolutely fascinating. So the idea that we are not good and we cannot trust our wants is archaic information. We absolutely should be trusting our wants because we are physiologically built to do good things. That's great news.
Yeah, no, that's really good. That's really very, very, very interesting research.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting.
It is.
This has been a presentation by Lisa Carlone Steindorf. You can find out more about Lisa's work and contact her at lisasteindorf.com. Thank you and be well.